I had to learn that being angry with my husband didn't give me permission to disrespect him. There were times in our marriage when I was frustrated with Jake, and I felt completely justified in what I was feeling. And sometimes I was. Sometimes I had a legitimate reason to be upset. Sometimes something needed to be addressed. Sometimes I needed to speak up. But looking back over 34 years of marriage, I learned something that completely changed the way I handled disagreements. My feelings could be valid, and my behavior could still be wrong. I could have a legitimate complaint and still say it in a way that damaged the person I loved. I could be right about the problem and wrong in the way I handled it. And that was a hard lesson for me. Because when you're angry, you don't always think about how you're delivering the message. You're thinking about what happened. You're thinking about what was said. You're thinking about what he did or didn't do. And in that moment, you want him to understand why you're upset. But sometimes we're so focused on making sure the other person understands our pain that we don't pay attention to the pain we're creating while we're explaining it. I had to learn that. Because anger has a way of convincing you that anything you say in that moment is justified. You tell yourself, well, I'm telling the truth. He needs to hear this. I'm tired of holding this in. And maybe all of that is true. But truth can still be delivered disrespectfully. And being right doesn't give us permission to be cruel. That's something I wish I had understood much earlier in my marriage. Because respect isn't something your spouse should only receive when you're getting along. Anybody can be respectful when everything is good. Anybody can speak kindly when they're happy. Anybody can be patient when they're getting what they want. The real test comes when you're disappointed, when you're frustrated, when you feel unheard, when you feel misunderstood, when you've already explained yourself 3 times and you feel like you're about to explain it for the 4th. That's when respect becomes a choice. And I had to learn how to make that choice. Because there was a time when I thought, if I'm angry, you're going to know I'm angry. My tone would change. My words would change. My whole attitude could change. And I didn't necessarily see that as disrespect. I saw it as expressing myself. But there's a difference between expressing yourself and unloading yourself onto another person. There's a difference between saying, "This hurt me," and saying something designed to hurt him back. There's a difference between addressing behavior and attacking character. That's where we have to be careful. Because when you're angry, it's very easy to stop talking about what happened and start talking about who the person is. You always do this. You never listen. You're so selfish. You don't care about anybody but yourself. Now we've moved away from the actual problem. We're attacking the person. And once that happens, the conversation changes. Because now he's not listening to understand the original problem. He's defending himself against the attack. And then I'm defending myself. And before you know it, we're arguing about how we're arguing. The original problem hasn't even been solved. I think a lot of couples get caught there. Something small happens, but instead of dealing with that one thing, we bring everything into it. Something from last month, something from 5 years ago, something his mother said, something he forgot, something you've already talked about 10 times. And now one disagreement is carrying the weight of 20 other disagreements. That's when words can become dangerous. Because once words leave your mouth, you can't pull them back. You can apologize. You can explain what you meant. You can say, I was just angry. But the other person still heard it. And some words stay with people. That's why I had to learn that not everything I thought while I was angry needed to come out of my mouth. That was maturity for me. Not pretending I wasn't angry. Not suppressing my feelings. Not becoming afraid to speak. But understanding that I could choose what I did with those feelings. Because anger is a feeling. Disrespect is a behavior. Those are two different things. I can feel angry and still choose my behavior. I can feel disappointed and still choose my words. I can feel hurt and still decide that I'm not going to deliberately wound the person standing in front of me. And wives, I want to be careful here. Respecting your husband does not mean you don't have a voice. It doesn't mean agreeing with everything he says. It doesn't mean accepting behavior that is wrong. And it certainly doesn't mean tolerating abuse, threats, intimidation, or being treated as though you don't matter. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about ordinary marital conflict between two people who love each other, but sometimes get angry with each other. You can speak the truth. You can address the problem. You can say, I don't agree with that. You can say, what you did hurt me. You can say, I need something to change. You can have boundaries. You can have expectations. You can have a strong voice. But you can do all of that without trying to destroy the person you're talking to. And I think that's where I grew the most. I learned that I didn't have to win every argument, because sometimes you can win the argument and damage the relationship. You can get the last word and still lose something. You can prove your point and leave the other person feeling so attacked that neither one of you actually heard the other. So eventually, I had to ask myself, what am I trying to accomplish here? Am I trying to solve the problem? Or am I trying to make Jake feel what I'm feeling? Because those are not always the same thing. And sometimes, if I'm being truthful, I wanted him to feel it. If I was hurt, I wanted him to understand how much it hurt. And sometimes I thought the only way to make him understand was to make him hurt too. But hurt doesn't create understanding. Usually, hurt creates more hurt. And then both people walk away wounded. So I had to learn another way. And here's what started helping me. When I felt myself getting angry, I learned to slow down. Not necessarily stop the conversation forever, just slow it down. Because everything doesn't have to be resolved in the next 5 minutes. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can say is, I want to talk about this, but I need a little time because I don't want to say something I'll regret. That's not avoiding the problem. That's protecting the conversation. There's a difference. Then I learned to lower my voice. And that sounds simple, but it changed a lot for me. Because when one person's volume rises, the other person's defenses usually rise with it. Now, neither one is listening. Both people are preparing to defend themselves. So, I started paying attention to my tone. Not because my feelings weren't important, but because they were important. I wanted Jake to actually hear what I was trying to say. Then I learned to stay with the issue. If I'm upset about what happened today, let's talk about today. I don't need to bring up something from 1998 to prove that I'm right in 2026. If we've already dealt with something, I don't need to keep pulling it back into every new disagreement, because eventually your spouse starts feeling like there's no way to recover. No matter what changes, the past keeps getting brought back as evidence. That's exhausting for both people. I also learned to describe what happened instead of defining the person. Instead of, you don't care about me, I can say, when that happened, I felt like what mattered to me wasn't being considered. Those two statements may come from the same hurt, but they don't land the same way. One attacks identity. The other explains experience. Instead of, you never listen to me, I can say, I don't feel heard right now. Can I finish what I'm trying to say? Now we're dealing with the actual problem. And here's another thing I had to learn. Listen after you speak. That was a big one, because sometimes we say we want a conversation when what we really want is an audience. We want to explain our side, and then we want the other person to agree. But marriage doesn't work that way. If I want Jake to hear my experience, I have to be willing to hear his. That doesn't mean I have to agree with everything he says. Understanding and agreement are not the same thing. But I can listen long enough to understand how he experienced the situation too. And sometimes when I did that, I realized something I hadn't considered. Sometimes his intention was completely different from the meaning I had given his behavior. Sometimes he didn't realize something had hurt me. Sometimes he was carrying something I didn't know about. And sometimes, yes, he was wrong. And sometimes I was wrong. That's marriage. Two imperfect people learning how to love each other without destroying each other every time they disagree. So, if you're angry with your husband today, here's what I would encourage you to do. First, give yourself permission to feel what you feel. You don't have to pretend you're not angry. You don't have to talk yourself out of being hurt. Acknowledge it. But before you speak, ask yourself, what do I want this conversation to accomplish? If the answer is connection, clarity, understanding, or change, then choose words that can actually get you there. Second, deal with the behavior without attacking the person. Talk about what happened. Talk about how it affected you. Talk about what you need going forward, but leave his dignity intact. Third, if you're too angry to do that, wait. Take some time. Pray. Walk around. Make a cup of coffee. Sit somewhere quietly. Whatever helps you settle yourself enough to have the conversation you actually want to have. Then come back to it. Don't use silence as punishment. Don't pretend the problem disappeared. Come back and talk. And finally, remember who you're talking to. This isn't some stranger you're trying to defeat. This is the person you've chosen to build a life with. And if you're both committed to that life, the goal isn't for one person to win. The goal is for the marriage to come through the disagreement stronger, not more wounded. That's what took me years to understand. I can be angry with Jake and still respect Jake. I can disagree with him and still love him. I can tell him the truth and still protect the dignity of the man I'm speaking to. And he owes me that same respect. Because respect in marriage goes both ways. That's the solution. not silence, not pretending, not avoiding difficult conversations. Learning how to tell the truth without using the truth as a weapon. Learning how to address what's wrong without tearing each other down. Learning when to speak, how to speak, and sometimes when to wait until you can speak from a calmer place. Because after 34 years of marriage, I've learned that some disagreements are unavoidable. Disrespect isn't. I'm Donna, and this is Still Standing with Donna. And remember, this is a season, not a sentence.